The latest Real Clear Politics general election poll shows Joe Biden ahead by 9.8 points, with the former vice president at 51% support compared to Trump's 42%.
But despite that lead at the moment, Republicans, of course, believe they can stage a comeback here and emerge victorious on Election Day. Author of They're Not Listening, How the Elites Created the National Populist Revolution, Ryan Girdusky, joins us now to weigh in on how they could pull off that upset. Great to see you, Ryan.
Good to see you, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
First, just lay out, how do you see the race right now? Like, what, in your view, is going on? Do you buy the polls? Do you think Biden really has that much of a lead? And do you think that Trump could ultimately pull off a comeback?
Well, Biden's lead right now is larger than Obama's was in 2008. Remember, in 2008, Obama won by 8 points. They have him up about 10 points. The ABC Washington Post poll has him up by 12 points. If you think that Biden has 50% more excitement around him than Obama did in 2008, we just are not living in the same world. I do think the polls sometimes maybe oversample size certain groups, and we get fixated on crosstabs that mean very, very little because they're sampling such small populations. But that being said, Trump is in trouble. There's no doubt about it. There's really two hard data points that we're really working with. One being the fact is early ballots. Early mail-in ballots overwhelmingly favor Democrats right now. There was kind of this whole push that we don't know who's counting the ballots that Trump was saying, and we can't trust the counting of the ballots. So so Democrats are leading. Republicans are probably going to vote on Election Day. The second thing is new registration. New registration numbers overwhelmingly favor the president. By huge numbers. I mean, Republicans are out-registering Democrats in every major swing state by huge margins. I mean, the numbers in Florida, Democrats have usually had more than 200,000 registered voters than Republicans in Florida. Now they have less than 145,000. They're down 200,000 in North Carolina, several hundred thousand in Pennsylvania. This is a gigantic, gigantic move. That being said, if it's a blowout election and independents and seniors are voting for Biden by 30 points, it's not going to matter. But if it's tight, those votes will really, really count for something.
I think it's important to point to that. So, Ryan, let me ask you this, which is that what could Trump do to pull things out at this point? We got 20-something, I think 21 days, 22 days until the election, the stimulus negotiations and more. If he could turn it around, as he did in 2016, what could he do?
I think that the most important thing he could probably do is economic stimulus right now, a direct payment to Americans. Now, I know talks between him and Pelosi have kind of faltered, but Trump could use whatever things he has in his being the executive to sit there and try to get a stimulus package out by himself. He could call the Treasury and ask them to mint a $1 trillion coin and use that as stimulus direct aid. He could do several other things to sit there and kind of push for a stimulus package. He could just force Republicans in the Senate to stop fighting against the stimulus package because, all of a sudden we can't afford it, according to them. Magically, when we ever need something for direct aid for people, Republicans are suddenly concerned about the debt and deficit. But I think that it's really important to try to get that direct aid out. I think a direct $1,200, $1,800 check would be really, really important. And it's important to note that even during the recession that came from the shutdown of the coronavirus, people's wealth went up. The amount of people who had an emergency $400 went up significantly, especially for those who have less than $25,000 a year income. That is that's a huge chunk of the population, and that could flip the entire election. Remember, as much as it appeals to sit there and talk about the stock market, there's far more people in this country who make up the workers than shareholders, right. And that's who he should be appealing to in this last 20-day push.
And where do you think that he went wrong to find himself in this position where he needs to mount a comeback, whether it's a 10-point comeback or a 5-point comeback or what it is? What mistakes do you think he made along the way?
I think had Ivanka married Tom Brady instead of Jared Kushner, he'd be up by 10 points.
You're probably right.
I think that really that was a sizable problem. I mean, listen, the guy had asked, I'm not going to go into all my problems with Jared Kushner, but I mean, Jared Kushner definitely made a lot of substantial problems when he sat there and said, hey, hiring people who read The Atlantic for their opinion on what minorities care about is always problematic. Having these white liberals sit there and cater and saying we're just going to do criminal justice reform and that will make minority groups love us, rather than sitting there and saying, hey, let's focus on poverty overall in this country and have a substantive conversation about poverty, because then you'll help, the white working class of Appalachia, who make up populations in West Virginia and North Carolina. And then we'll talk about that, and we'll help them in the Black population in the Deep South and the Native American population, the Hispanic population in the Southwest. Talk about poverty in a real substantive way. But instead, he seemed to bring along people like Jared or, the last remaining members of the Reagan administration who are still talking about trickle-down economics. Like, he's brought in like a coalition of the worst kinds of people in the world that no one would ever want around them to give them actual substantive advice, but he's managed to assemble them. I think that has been his biggest overall problem. As far as a policy person, on the outside, I mean, listen, the Russiagate stories and the constant Russian host, Glenn Greenwald posted this brilliant Twitter thread about how the media ginned up this nervousness among the population that Trump was an agent of Vladimir Putin for 3 years so they could sell books. I think that is really, I think that obviously that hurt him. It didn't help him by some of his Twitter antics and by hiring a bunch of neoliberals campaigning as post-liberals.
Ryan, let me ask you this. So we're going to have, whatever happens, I think that whether Trump wins or loses, there's going to be a big fight over who comes next. What do you think that fight is going to look like after the context of this election? What are going to be the driving issues within the Republican Party about who's going to win that civil war? Is it going to be the national populace, or is it going to be the libertarian elites?
Well, it's funny because after Bush lost in the biggest, rebuke in 2008, the Bush-ism loss, we got Mitt Romney. I mean, he was basically the difference between Bush and him were very, very slim. I think the voting base has moved. My problem is you have a bunch of libertarians in Washington D.C. who look at Nikki Haley and say, "Yes, Queen," and she's like the worst person in the whole. She's the Republican Hillary Clinton. And I think there's going to be a really big push to kind of thwart her. I'm sure that one of the Trump children will attempt to run for president or at least float the idea of running for president, which will also be. And then you'll probably have a bunch of the dying neo-Hawk wing of the Mike Pompeos run in, and then maybe like a Ron DeSantis or a Josh Hawley who will try to pick up more of an intellectual national populace. It just depends on what the electorate wants. I think there's a certain portion that are looking to people like Nikki Haley and saying, "Oh, you can finally prove that we're not, sexist and racist, and you'll carry that mantle for us." Rather than sitting there who pushes out a politician who pushes out policies that actually help poor people in this country, regardless of their race, they'll look to somebody who will fill a status quo and check a box, and they'll be, "Oh, you're like Candace Owens, but Indian."
Ryan, thank you so much. Great to have your insights
words,
today.
my friend. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
We'll have more Rising for you after this.